Hi lovelies, welcome back. So as you can see today we've got a little bit of a different setup. So I wanted to do something a bit calming, a bit relaxing. Having moved rooms, I wasn't happy with how my backdrop was looking, so I need to sort of rethink and try something a bit different, I think. But today, this has been requested many times, so I must apologise that I haven't done it yet. It's taken me too long to come around to getting it done, but there's one person in particular, I don't know if they want me to say their name, so I won't, but she's requested it a lot, and other people have too, so yeah, it's about time maybe I did it. And plus it's been a long time since I've read to you, and without an accent as well. It's just going to be just me, my normal accent. So yes, I will link in the description the last part, so I'm just going to pick it up from where I left off. I really panicked when I agreed to say, oh yeah, it has been on my list to do, I just pushed it back and back and back. And so I thought, I've got no idea where I got up to, and I'm going to have to sit through the whole video to figure it out. Anyway, I mentioned this, and they said end of chapter 5 onto chapter 6. So thank you so much, because you have done me a huge favour in that, but also shows just how desperately you wanted me to carry on. So yeah, if you want to see where we were up to before, so it has been well over a year, I think, shamefully. Well, I mean, I could just start it again, actually, couldn't I? The thing was, before, I was reading 3 different books in an episode. So I'd read a few chapters of each. So let me see. I'll pick it up from where we left off for the request, and let me know, because I can always do another video and we start it from scratch, just so that it's more fluent and it just flows better. Yeah. So I can't believe we're only on chapter 6. I felt like we were later on than that, but that's fine. I did a few videos and I was only reading a couple of chapters each time, so that would make sense. I hope you like the setup, by the way. It's I've tried to make it nice and calm. My newly painted walls, which I did myself, not to boast, just one of my other many talents. No, I'm joking. Don't look too closely, is what I will say. And I've got my lovely salt lamp in the corner. I thought that makes it a nice calm setting. Sorry I can't move the radiator, but I don't think it looks too unsightly. So, and I have got my lovely Village Wax Melts burner here, which obviously you can't really appreciate because it's out of view, but I don't know, it's nice and calming. I just think it's so pretty, the way that it is. Oh, it's difficult for you to see. I'm trying to be really careful because the wax has melted in the top as well. So when it's dark, shield the light. When it's dark, the light just glows out of the top and through the cracks as well. It's so pretty. So in my previous video, where I unbox all the wax products that I got from Village Wax Melts, like I said, it's not one that I would have chosen. That's not the sort of thing I'm naturally sort of drawn to. I'd have gone for something very simple, very plain, but actually, my god, that's so pretty. I love it so much. Just shows that you shouldn't stick to what you normally go for. You should push the boat out a bit and broaden your choices on things. You never know when you'll be pleasantly surprised. So, okay. Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I'll show the illustrations as we go, which are by Quentin Blake, which I feel like most people just know that now because it's just Roald Dahl and Quentin Blake, you just know. Okay, so chapter 6 has two finders. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy called Augustus Gloop, and Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old boy who was so enormously fat he looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out from every part of his body, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough with two small greedy curranty eyes peering out upon the world. The town in which Augustus Gloop lived, the newspaper said, had gone wild with excitement over their hero. Flags were flying from all the windows. Children had been given a holiday from school, and a parade was being organised in honour of the famous youth. I just knew Augustus would find a golden ticket, his mother had told the newspaper men. He eats so many bars of chocolate a day that it was almost impossible for him not to find one. Eating is his hobby, you know. That's all he's interested in. But still, that's far better than being a hooligan and shooting off zip guns and things like that in his spare time, isn't it? And what I always say is, he wouldn't go on eating like he does unless he needed nourishment, would he? It's all vitamins anyway. What a thrill it will be for him to visit Mr. Wonka's marvellous factory. We're just as proud as anything. What a revolting woman, said Grandma Josephine. And what a repulsive boy, said Grandma Georgina. Only 4 golden tickets left, said Grandpa George. I wonder who will get those. And now the whole country, indeed the whole world, seemed suddenly to be caught up in a mad chocolate-buying spree. Everybody searching frantically for those precious remaining tickets. Fully grown women were seen going into sweet shops and buying 10 Wonka bars at a time, then tearing off the wrappers on the spot and peering eagerly underneath for a glint of golden paper. Children were taking hammers and smashing their piggy banks and running out to the shops with handfuls of money. In one city, a famous gangster robbed a bank of £1,000 and spent the whole lot on Wonka bars that same afternoon. And when the police entered his house to arrest him, they found him sitting on the floor amidst mountains of chocolate, ripping off the wrappers with the blade of a long dagger. In far-off Russia, a woman called Charlotte Roos claimed to have found the second ticket, but it turned out to be a very clever fake. The famous English scientist Professor Fullbody invented a machine which would tell you at once, without opening the wrapper of a bar of chocolate, whether or not there was a golden ticket hidden underneath it. The machine had a mechanical arm that shot out with tremendous force and grabbed hold of anything that had the slightest bit of gold inside it, and for a moment it looked like the answer to everything. But, unfortunately, while the professor was showing off the machine to the public at the sweet counter of a large department store, the mechanical arm shot out and made a grab for the gold filling in the back of the tooth of a duchess who was standing nearby. There was an ugly scene, and the machine was smashed by the crowd. Suddenly, on the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspapers announced that the second golden ticket had been found. The lucky person was a small girl called Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents in a great city far away. Once again, Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a big picture of the finder. I'll just show you the illustration. I think there's one there as well. Sorry, I forgot to show you that. She was sitting between her beaming father and mother in the living room of their house, waving the golden ticket above her head and grinning from ear to ear. Veruca's father, Mr. Salt, had eagerly explained to the newspaper men exactly how the ticket was found. You see, boys, he had said, as soon as my little girl told me that she simply had to have one of those golden tickets, I went out into the town and started buying up all the Wonka bars I could lay my hands on. Thousands of them. I must have bought hundreds of thousands. Then I had them loaded onto trucks and sent directly to my own factory. I'm in the peanut business, you see, and I've got about 100 women working for me over at my place, shelling peanuts for roasting and salting. That's what they do all day long, those women. They sit there shelling peanuts. So I says to them, OK, girls, from now on you can stop shelling peanuts and start shelling the wrappers of these chocolate bars instead. And they did. I had every worker in the place yanking the paper of those bars of chocolate, full speed ahead from morning till night. But 3 days went by and we had no luck. Oh, it was terrible. My little Veruca got more and more upset each day. And every time I went home, she would scream at me, "Where's my golden ticket? I want my golden ticket." And she would lie for hours on the floor, kicking and yelling in the most disturbing way. Well, I just hated to see my little girl feeling unhappy like that, so I vowed I would keep the search going until I'd got her what she wanted. Then suddenly, on the evening of the 4th day, one of my women workers yelled, "I've got it! A golden ticket!" And I said, "Give it to me quick!" And she did. And I rushed it home and gave it to my darling Veruca, and now she's all smiles, and we have a happy home once again. "That's even worse than the fat boy," said Grandma Josephine. "She needs a really good spanking," said Grandma Georgina. "I don't think that girl's father played it quite fair, Grandpa, do you?" Charlie murmured. "He spoils her, and no good can ever come from spoiling a child like that, Charlie, you mark my words." "Come to bed, my darling," said Charlie's mother. "Tomorrow's your birthday, don't forget that, so I expect you'll be up early to open your present." "A Wonka chocolate bar? It's a Wonka bar, isn't it, please?" "Yes, my love. Of course it is." "Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I found the 3rd golden ticket inside it?" "Bring it in here when you get it," said Grandpa Joe. "Then we can all watch you taking off the wrapper." Charlie's birthday. "Happy birthday!" cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into their room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his 2 hands. "Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight," it said on the wrapper. The 4 old people, 2 at either end of the bed, propped themselves up on their pillows and stared with anxious eyes at the bar of chocolate in Charlie's hands. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed, watching Charlie. The room became silent. Everybody was waiting now for Charlie to start opening his present. Charlie looked down at the bar of chocolate. He ran his fingers slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking it lovingly, and the shiny paper wrapper made little sharp crackly noises in the quiet room. Then Mrs. Bucket said gently, "You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling. If you don't find what you're looking for underneath that wrapper, you really can't expect to be as lucky as all that." "She's quite right," Mr. Bucket said. Charlie didn't say anything. "After all," Grandma Josephine said, "in the whole wide world there are only 3 tickets left to be found." "The thing to remember," Grandma Georgina said, "is that whatever happens, you'll still have the bar of chocolate." "Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight," cried Grandpa George. "It's the best of them all. You'll just love it." "Yes, I know," Charlie whispered. "Just forget about all those golden tickets and enjoy the chocolate. Why don't you do that?" said Grandpa Joe. They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little bar of chocolate to have a magic ticket inside, and they were trying as gently and as kindly as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was one other thing that the grown-ups also knew, and it was this, that however small the chance might be of striking lucky, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular bar of chocolate had as much chance as any other of having a golden ticket inside. And that was why all of the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was, although they were pretending to be very calm. "You'd better go ahead and open it, or you'll be late for school," Grandpa Joe said. "You might as well get it over with," Grandpa George said. "Open it, my dear. Please open it. You're making me jumpy." Very slowly, Charlie's fingers began to tear open one small corner of the wrapping paper. The old people in the bed all leaned forward, craning their scraggy necks. Illustration. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down the middle, and onto his lap there fell a light brown, creamy-coloured bar of chocolate. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. "Well, that's that," said Grandpa Joe brightly. It's just what we expected. Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile, and then he shrugged his shoulders and picked up the chocolate bar and held it out to his mother and said, "Here, Mother, have a bit. We'll share it. I want everybody to taste it." "Certainly not," said his mother. All the others cried, "No, no, we wouldn't dream of it. It is all yours." "Please," begged Charlie, turning round and offering it to Grandpa Joe. But neither he nor anyone else would take a tiny bit. "It's time to go to school, my darling," Mrs. Bucket said, putting an arm around Charlie's skinny shoulders. "Come on, or you'll be late." Chapter 8. 2 more golden tickets found. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket, but the 4th as well. 2 golden tickets found today, screamed the headlines. Only 1 more left. "All right," said Grandpa Joe, when the whole family was gathered in the old people's room after supper. "Let's hear who found them." "The 3rd ticket," read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up close to his face, because his eyes were bad and he couldn't afford glasses. "The 3rd ticket was found by a Miss Violet Beauregarde." There was great excitement in the Beauregarde household when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady. Cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing, and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a bit closer to the famous girl. And the famous girl was standing on a chair in the living room, waving the golden ticket madly at arm's length, as though she were flagging a taxi. She was talking very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all that she said, because she was chewing gum so ferociously upon a piece of gum at the same time. "I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things of Mr. Wonka's, I gave up gum and started on chocolate bars in the hope of striking lucky. Now, of course, I'm back on gum. I just adore gum. I can't do without it. I munch it all day long except for a few minutes at mealtimes when I take it out and stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. To tell you the truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have that little wedge of gum to chew on every moment of the day. I really wouldn't. My mother says it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaws going up and down like mine do all the time, but I don't agree. And who's she to criticise anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine are, just from yelling at me every minute of the day." "Now, Violet," Mrs. Beauregard said from the far corner of the room, where she was standing on the piano to avoid being trampled on by the mob. "All right, Mother, keep your hair on," Miss Beauregard shouted. "And now," she went on, turning to the reporters again, "it may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing right at this moment is one I've been working on for over 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. It's beaten the record held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Princemetal, and she was furious. It's my most treasured possession now, this piece of gum is. At night time, I just stick it in the end of the bedpost, and it's as good as ever in the morning. A bit hard at first, maybe, but it soon softens up again after I've given it a few good chews. Before I started chewing for the world record, I used to change my piece of gum every day. I used to do it in our lift on the way home from school. Why the lift? Because I liked sticking the gooey piece that I'd just finished with onto one of the control buttons. Then the next person who came along and pressed the button got my old gum on the end of his or her finger. Ha ha! And what a racket they kicked up, some of them. You get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory. And I understand that afterwards he's going to give me enough gum to last me for the rest of my whole life. Whoopee! Hooray! Beastly girl, said Grandma Josephine. Despicable. She'll come to a sticky end one day, chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't. And who got the 4th golden ticket? Charlie asked. Now, let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The 4th golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike Teavee. Another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket. The Teavee household, said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading, was crammed like all the others with excited visitors when our reporter arrived, but young Mike Teavee, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business. Can't you fools see I'm watching television? He said angrily. I wish you wouldn't interrupt. The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film in which one bunch of gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike Teavee himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body. And every now and again, he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons. "Quiet," he shouted when someone tried to ask him a question. "Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the rotten ones when there's no one shooting. I like the gangsters best. They're terrific. Those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashing the old stilettos or giving each other 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Gosh, what I wouldn't give to be doing that myself. It's the life, I tell you. It's terrific." "That's quite enough," snapped Grandma Josephine. "I can't bear to listen to it." "Nor me," said Grandma Georgina. "Do all children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about?" "Of course not," said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in the bed. "Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do. But not all." "And now there's only one ticket left," said Grandpa George. "Quite so," sniffed Grandma Georgina. "And just as sure as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket'll go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it." Okay, so just to put my cardigan on. I've got a little bit chilly. I think the wind has picked up a bit outside, so you might hear that a little bit. It also could explain why I've got cold. Okay, so I think we'll read chapter 9. I think we'll pause it there and pick it up again a little bit later. Okay. Chapter 9. Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other 3 were all snoring loudly. "Shh," whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers. Under cover of the bedclothes, the old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver sixpence. "It's my secret hoard," he whispered. "The others don't know I've got it. And now you and I are just going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about it, hey? But you'll have to help me." "Are you sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa?" Charlie whispered. "Of course I'm sure," spluttered the old man excitedly. "Don't stand there arguing. I'm as keen as you are to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down the street to the nearest shop and buy the first Wonka bar you see and bring it straight back to me and we'll open it together." Charlie took the little silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In 5 minutes he was back. "Have you got it?" whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the bar of chocolate. "Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise," it said on the wrapper. "Good," the old man whispered, sitting up in the bed and rubbing his hands together. "Now, come over here and sit close to me and we'll open it together. Are you ready?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I'm ready." "All right, you tear off the first bit." "No," Charlie said. "You paid for it. You do it all." The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the wrapper. "We don't have a hope, really," he whispered, giggling a bit. "You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I know that." They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously. "Mind you," said Grandpa Joe, "there is just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree?" "Yes, of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa?" "All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think I ought to open first?" "That corner, the one furthest from you. Just tear off a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see anything." "Like that?" said the old man. "Yes, now a little bit more." "You finish it," said Grandpa Joe. I'm too nervous. No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself. Very well then, here goes. He tore off the wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of chocolate, nothing more. All at once, they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. What on earth's going on? Cried Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly. Nothing. You go on back to sleep. Okay, that was considerably shorter than I thought, so I think we'll go on to number 10 as well. The family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the colour of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything, except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realise, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted, because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of chocolate, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he'd got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets, but it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve, and every day little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. Next picture. And every day, as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high into the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths as though he were trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head out from under the blanket one icy morning, "that child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy. He can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip down a piece of her own bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." "He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shapes of the bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this, without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did. so as to save his strength. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slowly to school, without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during break time, resting himself, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by something silvery lying in the gutter, in the snow. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a 50p piece. Quickly he looked round him. Had somebody just dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the pavement, their chins sunk deep in their collars of their coats, their feet scrunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then was it his? This 50p? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. He held it tightly between his fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him in that moment, only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery shop, the kind that sells almost everything, including sweets and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of chocolate and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there, and the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give to his mother. I'm going to read from the chat. I love reading to you, so it's only 2 pages, so. Chapter 11, The Miracle. Charlie entered the shop and laid the damp 50p on the counter. One Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, he said, remembering how much he had loved the one he'd had on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. The fat around his neck bulged out all around the top of his collar like a rubber ring. He turned and reached behind him for the chocolate bar. Then he turned back again and handed it to Charlie. Charlie grabbed it and quickly tore off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then he took another, and another, and oh, the joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with rich, solid food. You look like you wanted that one, Sonny, the shopkeeper said pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. Take it easy. It'll give you a tummy ache if you swallow it like that without chewing. Charlie went on wolfing the chocolate. He couldn't stop, and in less than half a minute the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, but he felt marvellously, extraordinarily happy. He reached out a hand to take the change, then paused. His eyes were just above the level of the counter. They were staring at the silver coins lying there. The coins were all 5p pieces. There were 9 of them altogether. Surely it wouldn't matter if he spent just one more. I think, he said quietly, I think I'll have just one more of those chocolate bars. The same kind as before, please. Why not? The fat shopkeeper said, reaching behind him again and taking another Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight from the shelf. He laid it on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore off the wrapper, and suddenly, from underneath the wrapper, there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. It's a golden ticket, screamed the shopkeeper, leaping about a foot in the air. You've got a golden ticket. You found the last golden ticket. Hey, would you believe it? Come look at this, everybody. The kid's found the Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is. It's right there in his hands. It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. In my shop too, he yelled. He found it right here in my own little shop. Somebody call the newspapers quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it as you unwrap it. That thing's precious. In a few seconds, there was a crowd of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and many more were pushing their way in from the street. Everybody wanted to get a look at the golden ticket and at the lucky finder. "Where is it?" somebody shouted. "Hold it up so all of us can see it." "There it is there," someone else shouted. "He's holding it in his hands. See the gold shining?" "How did he manage to find it? I'd like to know," a large boy shouted angrily. 20 bars a day I've been buying for weeks and weeks. Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting too," another boy said enviously. "A lifetime supply." "He'll need it, the skinny little shrimp," a girl said, laughing. Charlie hadn't moved. He hadn't even unwrapped the golden ticket from around the chocolate. He was standing very still, holding it tightly with both hands while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming over him, as though he were floating up in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all, and he could hear his heart thumping away loudly somewhere in his throat. At that point, he became aware of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. "Listen," the man whispered. "I'll buy it from you. I'll give you £50. How about it, eh? I'll give you a new bicycle as well, okay?" "Are you crazy?" shouted a woman who was standing equally close. "Why, I'd give him £200 for that ticket. You want to sell that ticket for £200, young man?" "That's quite enough of that," the fat shopkeeper shouted, pushing his way through the crowd and taking Charlie firmly by the arm. "Leave the kid alone, will you? Make way there. Let him out." And to Charlie, as he led him to the door, he whispered, "Don't you let anybody have it. Take it straight home quickly before you lose it. Run all the way and don't you stop until you get there, you understand?" Charlie nodded. "You know something?" the fat shopkeeper said, pausing a moment and smiling at Charlie. "I have a feeling you needed a break like this. I'm awfully glad you got it too. Good luck to you, sonny." "Thank you," Charlie said, and off he went, running through the snow as fast as his legs would go. And as he flew past Mr. Willy Wonka's factory, he turned and waved at it and sang out, "I'll be seeing you, I'll be seeing you." And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his own home. I think I'm going to leave it there. Leave it on a cliffhanger. Okay. Got our bookmark in it. So we're up to chapter 12. And I'll try not to leave it so long next time. I've changed my uploading schedule, so I am doing it every Monday, and then if I am organised enough, then I'll try and upload later in the week as well, but it'll be at least every Monday. So maybe this is one that I could start uploading later in a week on a Thursday or something for you. But I thoroughly enjoyed reading to you today, and I hope you've enjoyed it too, so I hope you're nice and relaxed, and I'll see you